Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hi everyone, welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. It is Friday, October 18th, and that means we've got an issues panel. And oh my goodness, could any more have happened this week? So really glad that we've got Tyler McCann, Managing Director of CAPI, joining us for the issues panel. We've also got Kelvin Heppner, of course, so he's been busy trying to make sense of all the news that's been happening. Yes, specifically to the agriculture world, but frankly, just politics in general and policy as well. So stick around. We're going to have 3 full segments of the issues panel. Sean Haney is away today. He's having a much deserved week off. And so I'm sure we'll get a few digs in, and we'll see if we still have a show here on Monday. We'll see how we do. Also on today's show, of course, we've got a product spotlight with Amy Crozier of Nutrien. We're going to talk about nutrient planning for next season. So that is, of course, an incredibly important one. As always, if you've got feedback on today's show, give us a call, 1-855-776-6147. I can get that right. Or you can send me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. And of course, you can find us across social media. We are on TikTok. You might be watching us on YouTube. You might be listening to us on our podcast feed. We're also on X, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. And of course, head on over to realagriculture.com. You can find all of our coverage, all of our videos, all of our audio, and even just our written pieces. So there you go. All right, we're going to take a break here, and then I will be back to bring in the issues panel and tackle all the big news that has been happening this week. All right, let's do that. I'll be back with more right after this.
Get ready for tillage season with the high-speed disc from Brandt. Cut and size residue, create ideal seed beds, and level ruts faster than any other tillage machine. It's a better field finish and fewer passes, so you can stay on schedule, no matter what fall throws at you. And right now, you can get yours with a $12,000 rebate. There's never been a better time to bring your operation up to speed. Visit Brandt.ca for details.
Joining me now is Courtney Stevenson, Portfolio Manager with New Farm. What could farmers be doing this fall to get ahead of next spring?
It's important to start thinking about applying a soil active herbicide so that they can get ahead of their weeds for the next spring. One of the nice things about applying in the fall is that Beer EZ and Volterra EZ are activated by moisture. It's a great way to use snow to your advantage. The snowpack will activate these products. It's a little bit nicer in that you don't have to incorporate. You can just apply them with your sprayer. One of the things that is also a benefit by applying in the fall, a grower has 8 weeks of activity in the spring. You're going to be preserving your moisture and fertility in the spring by controlling your weeds at that time.
Is there such thing as too early or too late?
You need to apply these products when the soil temperature is 10 degrees Celsius or lower. The first best stop would be to talk to your local retailer, or you can always go to newfarm.ca/fall apply.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host on this Friday, and this segment is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. The best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection. Why that's Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca. That's KOCHAG.ca. Bringing in now my issues panel friends. We are going to essentially have a heyday here, pardon the pun, because Sean's away, so the mice can play. So my colleague out of Altona, Manitoba, Kelvin Heppner, what nonsense are you getting up to while Sean is on holidays?
Well, it kind of fits in nicely with the promo read just barely. We've spent the week getting our fertilizer down for 2025 crop. And so, yeah, it's been spent a fair bit of time in the cab listening to, trying to keep up with all the crazy news happening this week, all kinds of stuff happening in the news cycle. So looking forward to talking about it here.
Mm-hmm. And I will mention, while Sean is off, he is terrible at it. And with this much news happening, he has had a very hard time not continually texting us about what he thinks of all the just absolutely ridiculous tidal wave of news that's been happening this week. So to break it all down, of course, we also have Tyler McCann. He's managing director of CAPI. Tyler, we are not that far from each other as the crow flies. The weather is stunningly beautiful. Are you also dealing with perhaps nutrients for next year's crop?
No, part of my issue is we have some standing sorghum that is supposed to be grazed, and I've been waiting for a killing frost, and instead what we get are a bunch of days that are cold but not that cold, and I'm too scared to put my cows into it. But
probably smart.
Again, a good thing, I guess, a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, give it a couple days and enjoy the heat, and then we'll go back to a regular fall. But it has been beautiful. Okay, what has not been beautiful, perhaps, is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's track record with his own MPs, apparently. Tyler, I'll start with you. We are potentially going to see, even today on Friday, not as of recording, but maybe today, maybe through the weekend, a letter or a note, we're not sure, being slid across the desk to Justin Trudeau to say these 20 MPs would like you to step down. What do you think? Do you think he'll do it?
Well, so I think that there's a couple of different notes that are getting slid across desks these days. Again, we saw the notes from 4 MPs or 4 ministers saying they're not going to run again in the election. We've had this talk about a note from 20 MPs that are going to say something that may range from, Prime Minister, we really think that somebody should be thinking about the future of the country and the party, to Prime Minister, we think that you should step down. I'm not sure if we'll actually see what that note looks like, but clearly the Liberal MPs and caucus members are seeing the same things that many of us are seeing today, which is that the Liberal Party's in trouble and that there's probably need for a change.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin, did you get advanced screening of said note and have the 20 MPs' names that we are now, breaking news, going to reveal, or no?
I have not seen the note, and I'm curious what it looks like. It sounds like they're not allowing anybody to. It's not a digital copy. They're not allowing pictures of it. It's I guess the kind of thing that could be thrown away if convenient. It sure seems like people are really tiptoeing into this, as certainly a lot of Liberal MPs, maybe all of them, you could say, owe their careers to Justin Trudeau and his leadership, and going back to 2015 and the election since then. And so there certainly is a lot of reluctance to confront him on needing to step out. And it sure seems like a lot of the leadership on this is coming from that Atlantic Caucus group. And guess who's the chair of the Atlantic Caucus? It's our friend Cody Blois, who's joined us on the Issues Panel in the past. And Cody's one of the few names that has specifically been mentioned. Not that he's overtly on the record as having signed this note, but I'm really curious what role and perspective Cody is taking on this. And if it's 20 MPs, it depends who it is. It doesn't need to be. It isn't necessarily going to be a fatal blow, or the Liberal caucus is large enough that they could have 20 MPs that aren't happy. It's a matter though of which MPs it is. And some people, I heard Tom Mulcair yesterday say that it's up to 28 MPs that have signed it so far. So I'm assuming we'll find those details out in the coming weeks here. And Tyler mentioned the 4 cabinet ministers that all announced, just happened to announce on the same day yesterday that they are not going to be running again. It sure looks like that was orchestrated by the PMO as potentially a carrot that is in front of the Liberal caucus. Now, be on your best behavior in the next week if you want a cabinet seat before the next election.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it does sort of tie in together. And of note, we will dig into Marie-Claude Bibeau, former agriculture minister, is one of those 4 who sit in cabinet who have put forward that she is not running. And it does beg the question, of course, does this sort of set the stage for, all right, you're unhappy. However, here are some cabinet postings that are up for grabs. What can we work out here? What can we negotiate? I have heard in what I've been watching, what I've been listening to, there may not be a rush necessarily to fill these cabinet positions because of some of that wrangling, maybe, Kelvin.
Well, yeah, there might not be a rush because you can keep, as soon as you hand out those carrots, then you offend everybody that doesn't get one of those 4 carrots. So that is potentially one of the reasons why those cabinet seats won't be filled here. And some people may say, well, what does it really matter? You want to be a cabinet minister, just get to know your file and then have to go to an election in the coming months. One aspect that I've heard pointed out is that it looks good on a resume if you're looking for a different career opportunity in the next couple of years if you've held a cabinet position.
Kelvin, that
But
stings. I was just going to say, Tyler, that stings. Go ahead.
But so much of it, kind of the conventional wisdom of how you would normally think governments, cabinets, prime ministers to act and do things just doesn't seem to apply in this case, right? So I think that there was this sense that change would come after they lost the Toronto by-election in June. Change never came. I think that there was the sense that change would come after they lost the Montreal by-election in September. Change never came. We've had Pablo Rodriguez leave cabinet, and they thought maybe change will come. Change never came. We've got these 4 ministers that aren't running, and change hasn't come yet. So I think that conventionally we would expect things to happen. Maybe it's because of this kind of grand strategy, Lyndsey, that you talked about. I'm not sure that it's that. I'm increasingly convinced that that's just the way that this government works these days, is that it's hard for them to make decisions. They did this big change, cabinet shuffle 2 years ago, never resulted in, it didn't have the impact that they wanted. And I wonder how much of it is just they're still trying to figure out what to do. They don't know. They're going to kind of all of these different parts moving. Prime Minister did a podcast a couple of weeks ago and seemed to be not feeling much pressure to change much of anything. And so I think that's why we see, nothing changing.
Is the Prime Minister just really good at pretending to be happy, or is he just clueless? That's rhetorical. I'm just going to leave that there. But did want to note, you're right, Pablo Rodriguez, of course, announced his departure. Carla Qualtrough was the other. Dan Vandel out of Manitoba, name there, and Filomeno Tassi are round out that list of those cabinet ministers who have stepped down now, or don't plan to run. Let's put it that way. One person, though, of note, because it was my first question to Kelvin when he said, hey, these 4 cabinet ministers are not running. My next question, and maybe y'all can guess what it is, well, what about our friend, Lawrence MacAulay? Kelvin, is Lawrence going to run again?
Lawrence is always preparing for the next election, is the reply that his office gave us yesterday. Okay. So as of now, it doesn't sound like he has made a decision, or not a definitive decision that's at least been communicated to the PMO or the Liberal Party. The nomination in his riding it sounds like it's not actually filled yet. He hasn't given the riding association yes or no at this point as to whether he wants to run again. But having been the MP for that riding for 36 years, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Lawrence gets the last, or it's up to him. Yeah. How that nomination process unfolds there. And so at this point, it sounds like he is intent. He hasn't said no. And the way that everything was announced yesterday with the 4 ministers and obviously the PMO approving the announcement yesterday, you'd think that they were trying to clear the deck and not to talk about a sinking ship here, but the deck chairs trying to get all the bad news out at once. You don't want this coming out in dribs and drabs over months with key cabinet ministers leaving. And so you'd think if he had said to the PMO that he's not intending to run, they would have maybe announced that yesterday, and it wasn't announced. And so at this point, it looks like Lawrence, it's status quo with Minister MacAulay, our ag minister, remaining in Parliament.
Tyler, Kelvin's put it quite well. Let's get all the news out at once and sort of let the chips fall. Does it surprise you that MacAulay is always ready for the next election?
I think we've heard a lot over the years, given his age and experience, that Minister MacAulay may not run again, but he always chooses to. I think that there's a lot of respect for someone that has dedicated that much of their life to public service. You really can't take that away from him. But, at a time when those races in Eastern Canada, in the Maritimes, are going to be tougher than probably he's ever experienced in 37 years, you do have to wonder what opportunity there would be for some generational change. I understand that there's interest in that riding. There's people, again, Liberals in PEI that that have been waiting to maybe run for that nomination, but are never given the chance. And it's going to be tough. But it really is hard to understand what's motivating him to keep going these days.
Well, he's been doing it for 36 years, Tyler. What else is he going to do? This is what he does. He's an MP.
Sounds like a farmer.
Sounds like a farmer.
As he himself often says, he's a farmer. And someone once said it's a lot easier to get into farming than it is to get out of farming. And
that's right.
And maybe as long as you keep winning your seats, it's a lot easier to get into politics than it is to get out of it too.
It's a good observation, though, and maybe we'll leave it on that note, that, there are other people who I'm sure are, generations younger, potentially, that would like to run in that riding, potentially. And I suppose as we wait to see this list of MPs that would like change or different leadership, potentially, in the Liberal Party, we'll see if maybe that shifts some of this as well. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're actually going to jump to today's product spotlight. We're going to talk about, as Kelvin mentioned, some fertilizer for 2025 crop, and then I'll be back with the issues panel right after this. Ready to take your oat game to the next level? Try CDC Endure from Alliance Seed. CDC Endure oats are consistently one of the top yielding varieties in the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta provincial yield trials. With strong standability, excellent disease resistance, and excellent end-use quality, CDC Endure might be the variety for you and your farm. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers. For more information, visit allianceseed.com. Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for today's product spotlight. Joining me now is Amy Crozier. She's the Senior Ag Specialties Rep for Nutrien. Welcome here, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Lyndsey. I'm excited to be here.
All right, we are going to talk crop nutrition. And big question when we're sitting down to think about what decisions we're going to make for next year, we need to think about nutrient removal. We also need to think about nutrient uptake. What's the difference?
So nutrient uptake is what the plant requires through the whole plant life cycle, from seed to finished seed product. And nutrient removal is what we're actually removing from the field in our seed, and as well as in our straw material. If you're baling, you're taking nutrients away as well. So we need to make sure that we have enough for uptake for that plant to fully reach its potential, but we might not be removing all of those nutrients from the soil.
Right. So this, of course, is going to come into play when we're starting to think about our decisions for next year. So how then could a farmer or an advisor find accurate nutrient removal data?
So there is, we have our website, Smart Nutrition and Smart Nitrogen has an economic site. And so there's some independent agronomy and links in there. For example, there's the link to the prairie crop removal, which has been just updated recently. Our Canadian agronomist Lyle Cowell worked on that website. And you can put in your crop and what your yield expectations is, and it can give you a general prediction on what nutrient removal you'll be taking from the soil.
Okay, so thinking about removal, but also think about nutrient uptake. So what our crop is going to need, or what we've maybe removed from the field. How do we sort of put those two things together when we're thinking about our purchasing decisions for the next year?
So it's really important to be soil testing. Our soil is the basis of everything that we're doing. That's our foundation of our crops. So it's very important to soil test. Know your geography. What is your limit? Are we short on water? Is our yield potential 30? Is our yield potential 50? So understanding what we're going for and aiming for, what's in our soil, as well as other factors, is did we have disease issues? Did we have low proteins? Did we not meet our expectations? Is there nothing left in the tank when we're finishing off our crop? Did we have maturity issues? So all these different things put together can help influence those decisions. Maybe we want to change our strategy to have some season-long feeding products like an ESN or some slower release sulfurs, depending on what our soil test tells us and what our crop is telling us when we're taking it off.
Right. And so you've hit on, of course, two of the big ones, nitrogen. For some crops, though, sulfur is also a really important nutrient in bigger quantities. Which crops do we really need to be focused on when we're thinking about sulfur?
So sulfur is really the fourth macronutrient. It works with nitrogen. It's very important to our oilseed crops, but it's also important we produce the highest protein wheat in the world, and we're the farthest away from the markets. When we're going for those high protein wheat, sulfur is also very important. In canola, it's important that first 45 days, as well as later when we're filling the plant, and same in our pulse crops. It's also needed in our peas and lentils. So sulfur is a very important macronutrient. It's the fourth macronutrient, and it's important to have it season long.
Mm-hmm. Now, nitrogen, of course, also gets a lot of attention, as it should. It is, of course, needed in large quantities. Which crops are we really focused on for that big nitrogen need?
Per bushel per acre, we'll remove different amounts of nitrogen, but it really depends on our yield goals. In southern Alberta, in a drought year, we might only be getting 20 bushels of a certain crop, whereas in a high moisture, high organic matter area, we might be getting 50 or 60 bushels. So there are different crops that have different ratios of nitrogen per bushel that we use, but it's very important to know what variety you're growing, what your soil zone is, how much organic matter you're going to kick out, and understanding what limiting factors you have. Do you need more nitrogen later on? Are you in a sandy soil where you're leaching, and maybe you need a slow release nitrogen product like ESN, or maybe you need a stabilizer at the beginning when you're applying, because it's also very important that it's not just the amount of nitrogen we need, but it's also the right source and right place, that we're not losing it before our plant is needing it.
Absolutely. All right. So where can farmers and their advisors go for more information?
You can go to our website. It's called smartnitrogen.com. And there you can also have a link to our Smart Nutrition site, our economics. And we also have a podcast, which is an independent agronomy podcast called The Dirt, which is North American. So you can hear what's going south of the border and north of the border as well for more information.
Wonderful. Okay, Amy, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Thank
you very much for having me. And good luck to all the farmers out there.
All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. Making the most efficient use of your dollars spent on crop nutrition is a constant goal of all farmers. We recognize this hurdle as you prepare for another growing season. It's challenging to balance economics over ever-changing environmental conditions. Alpine developed the Maximizing Fertilizer Efficiency Program to solve this yearly dilemma. The program's goal is to reduce risk from variable weather conditions by managing the nutritional requirements for your crop in a timely manner. To learn more, visit alpinepfl.com today.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. It is time for the Issues Panel, and this segment is brought to you by Pioneer Brand Canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here. All right, joining me, of course, on the Issues Panel today, we've got Tyler McCann of CAPI, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. And Tyler, when we prepared for this show, we have a little group chat. We say, what are we going to talk about? And you had to bring up, and I say had to bring up, apparently, there was a paper put out this week, some discussion about how much milk gets spilled in the dairy industry. What say you about this paper?
So for those people that may not know, my wife and I have beef cows, but I spent quite a bit of time over the years milking cows. My uncles were dairy farmers. I milked on the weekends for years, grew up working on a dairy farm. And when the paper came out, I was confused, Lyndsey, because in all of kind of the, I don't know, couple of decades that I've been around dairy farms, I haven't seen anybody dumping milk for kind of any reason. It didn't make sense to me how you would get to this number that 7% of the milk that's dumped that's produced in this country is dumped. One of the benefits of supply management is that you actually can kind of understand how much milk you should produce. And I think, again, most of the farmers that I know do a pretty good job of lining up their production with what's there. So it reduces this kind of need to kind of dump milk. You hear these stories in the United States where there is quite a bit of milk that gets dumped when contracts are changed or plants go down. And again, we don't see that in the Canadian context. So, I think it's worth talking about these things because they get mainstream attention, but they also underscore, I think, how little sometimes people understand about the practical realities of milk production and supply management.
So, Kelvin, we did a bit of digging into this paper that does note 7% of the milk produced over quite a long timeline. We did look, the U.S. number is about 5%. So as a percentage, slightly higher than the U.S., which, to Tyler's point, we're in a supply managed system. You would think we should be able to potentially reduce that. At the same time, I can think of several reasons why milk gets dumped, and some of them are incredibly good ones. Nothing to do with contracts. Things like incredible, let's say, snowstorms. I do know where trucks have not been able to get to a dairy in time, and the bulk tank is too full, although most farms have a pretty large bulk tank that tries to account for some of that overage. I can think of if there were the potential of residues in a tanker truck, that is obviously going to be dumped and destroyed. Kelvin, this paper that we're talking about, did it spell out where and why such milk was dumped?
No, it did not. This paper from Dalhousie University, it basically the math was done to estimate how much milk is produced in Canada based on the number of cows and using average production and average days per year in production and that type of thing to calculate how much milk potential production or how much production potential there is in the Canadian dairy cow herd. And then they subtracted reported sales, and that difference was the amount that was described as being spilled or having been discarded. So it certainly did not differentiate all of those different scenarios you talked about, Lyndsey, where milk is kept out of the food, is not sold due to either food safety or quality or animal care reasons, logistics. All of those types of factors could potentially go into this number. And we compared it to the U.S. number of 5%. I think that U.S. number fluctuates and it's not always measured the same way. And so it's difficult to make that direct comparison, but it sure seems like it's not incredibly out of line, especially if that 7% is using the worst case scenario here, that 10 billion liters of milk was kind of the upper bound. And we also have to look at, in this report, they estimated the environmental impact of all of these billions of liters of milk that supposedly disappeared. The environmental impact estimates in the study, when you looked at it closely, were based on Quebec dairy farms specifically, which we know that Quebec has smaller dairy herds on average and potentially maybe not as efficient as national averages. I know some that would be up for debate, I would say. And so I think there's a number of questions that arise, at least at first glance, looking at this study, and certainly a lot of that nuance we know doesn't get conveyed in mainstream coverage of issues like this.
Tyler, from a consumer's perspective, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just because you can do math doesn't mean you should do math, and I think that this is a really good example of, legitimate calculations or kind of accurate calculations that were just not legitimate, because really missing kind of some really important context, comparing apples to oranges. Supply management is not a perfect system. There is a lot of opportunity to improve it. But of all of the issues facing dairy farmers today, the ability to understand what your production quota is, to understand what your production from your cows is, that is inherently one of the features of the Canadian system. And so all of that kind of was missed from this. And again, it gets a lot of mainstream attention. So I think we need to talk about it. But there's a lot more pressing issues that do matter. Things like Bill C-282, that is kind of ongoing, that we should be thinking about. That's really what we should be talking about at the end of the day.
Yeah, Kelvin?
Just quickly, that's a great point, Tyler. Dairy farms, the well-managed dairy farms have, like, they're not wasting because they're running efficiently, and that is ultimately there's a huge signal to run efficiently in the supply managed system. I wanted to also note, though, that while we are being critical of this study, the idea of reducing food waste and reducing waste, I think, is still incredibly admirable and noble, and something that the dairy industry should always be working on, reducing this waste number. It's not something that we should just ignore and be okay with. It's something that we should continually be working to reduce the waste in the system and inefficient in our food system.
But Kelvin, you may want to pick on dairy farmers, but I don't think it's appropriate to signal out the dairy industry when it comes to reducing food loss and waste. This is an issue that every industry needs to take seriously. Consumers themselves have actually a lot more at stake. They're wasting a much higher value of food than anyone else is. So Kelvin is signaling out dairy there, and I don't think that that's right.
I get what you mean, Kelvin, is that realistically running these numbers and looking at how much is potentially quote unquote wasted is an important exercise. It's something that I think every industry should be looking at. And perhaps it's somewhat easier in some ways for supply management and supply managed sectors to be able to do that. And I think it is an important endeavor. I think this particular study, though, and looking at the last 5 years, including COVID, when we looked at what happened when demand shifted overnight so suddenly from the retail side, from the restaurant side, from the whatever, we did see milk that ended up getting dumped because the demand evaporated overnight, right? And I think that shows you that in the context of supply management, it is one of our industries that actually, the dairy industry, the chicken and egg, that we actually do try very hard to match up supply with that demand. If that demand, of course, is absolutely blown out of the water because of something like a global pandemic, we're going to see milk get spilled. I know that we saw some of the anger over that during COVID of this is, wasted food and this is food but we have to understand the realities of, the food system isn't just what you buy at the grocery store. There's a huge amount from restaurants, hospitals, like all this other demand that is made up of, our demand on our dairy system that sort of evaporate overnight. So we do have to think about that in the context of these numbers. And to your point, Tyler, of just because you can doesn't mean you should. I'm disappointed that it feels like this is a paper that is put out there really just to get consumers fuzzed up about something, or maybe to bring a critical eye on our supply managed sectors. And I don't really think that, honestly, that this paper holds up. There are some gigantic holes in the data, and I really don't see that this is adding to the conversation in any measurable way, beyond to say that, here are the ways that we do try to control food waste. I did want to shift gears, though. You did mention 282, Tyler. I think it's still one of those things that is on our radar, regardless of the fact that the political drama has been very much looking at, these 20 MPs, like we talked about, as well as, and we will touch on our diplomatic relations with India as well at some point. But on Bill 282, I did, and it'll be on realagriculture.com soon, and also here on RealAg Radio next week. I spoke with Colin Robertson about Bill 282, about speaking to the Senate committee on 282. His point very much was that our supply managed sectors do good things, make great products. We really shouldn't be so entirely consumed by protecting them from trade deals. Tyler, do you agree? Can we compete if we lose some access? If we give up some of that access for our supply managed sectors, can we compete?
I think that the short answer is it depends, right? These are diverse products. It depends on what is the access that we're giving up. One of the things that, especially when it comes to dairy, this is these are wildly different products. There are a bunch of different tariff lines that are there. There are ways that negotiators, when they're given the flexibility, can minimize concessions and minimize the impact. And again, I think one of the unfortunate things with 282 is that it ends up trying to tie the hands of our negotiators. And the best thing and the best outcome for everybody is, let's let our negotiators find the right ways to make the right concessions so that we are conceding in ways where we can compete. But Lyndsey, the short answer is, though, that we might not be able to. And I think that is part of what drives the SM groups to say no more concessions, is because they are worried about how competitive they are. But we should be having a different discussion then. We should be talking about what can we do? How do we improve that competitiveness? If we can't, what do we do instead? And we just don't get to have any of those conversations today.
Kelvin, we often look to New Zealand when we talk dairy. This little nation that is green all the time, I would like to point out, does not get the winters that we get. So this is a key difference. But we have, of course, under different trade agreements, opened up some access specifically to dairy, which New Zealand has yet again pointed out that Canada is perhaps not playing fair on the world scale. We did hear some of that this week. What is happening with our Kiwi friends?
Yeah, the New Zealand government, similar to how the U.S. has challenged some of the tariff rate quota allocations under Canada's dairy system, the New Zealand government has challenged it under the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. And as of today, the New Zealand government, the trade minister, announced that they've notified the Canadian government that they've triggered mandatory negotiations in this trade dispute with Canada. And so now there's a process that has to begin within the next 15 days. It's basically an escalation of this dispute. New Zealand trying to get a resolution here, as they're not happy with the changes that Canada has made or not made so far. And so, yeah, we'll see some potential developments here on the CPTPP side of things when it comes to dairy concessions that were made a few years ago now.
I feel like CPTPP has just not been in the news lately. And so let's bring it back, everybody, because we need one more thing to have to keep track of this week. Just one more. But it's one of those things that as we have these trade deals, we have dispute mechanisms within them, and realistically, Canada has to potentially answer for them. In the case of the U.S., the answer was, hey, we fixed it. Then the U.S. said, no, you didn't. And we go back and forth. I wanted to just point out, and Kelvin, Tyler, I'd love either of your perspective on this, that, certainly we take our shots at supply management here, and I'm saying we as in me. One of the observations, though, that I think is important is that from a local perspective, I think that it's very easy to see the value of our supply managed sectors. So as farmers in our communities, we see having either the feathers or dairy in your community adds a lot to the local economy, right? And that is incredibly important. I think sometimes it's hard, though, at that local level to recognize the incredible impact of our export dependent commodities when we think bigger picture to the average Canadian. Tyler, your thoughts?
Yeah, Lyndsey, there's always the old joke, right? Beef farmers need dairy farmers to buy the new tractors, so beef farmers have a used tractor that they can buy.
Sheep farmers too.
Yeah, but sheep farmers may be stuck buying the used tractor after the beef guy is done with it. I don't know how good it is in the sheep business, but again, I think that we don't have this kind of same appreciation for export ag and kind of this role that international markets play. Even if some of the beef that we produce at home doesn't end up in Japan or some other place, the ability for beef to go from Canada to Japan plays such a critical role in the success of every beef farmer across the country. That's true no matter what you grow, no matter what you play. And it is also important to note that in even within supply management, trade is important. So we export quite a bit of chicken, right? So Canadians, we really like our white meat. We don't eat dark meat, so we export kind of a fair amount of dark meat out of Canada. We need a functioning trade systems for all of Canadian agriculture to survive.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin, your thoughts, or do you want to just go to a break? Because we can just go to a break.
No, I agree, and that's where I think there is such a political challenge for the supply management for government in terms of ever winding it down as some people would like to see happen, because of the gutting of rural communities and businesses and feed mills and equipment dealers and banks and all the impact that would all the other secondary businesses that would be impacted by the loss of dairy and poultry if we aren't able to compete with production coming from south of the border.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our last segment with the Issues Panel right after.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Gly delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGly.ca.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday Issues Panel. Joining me is Kelvin Heppner and Tyler McCann. This segment is brought to you by the pre-emergent soil active herbicides Valterra, EZ, and Fierce EZ from Nufarm. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds. Spray this fall for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control next spring. Find out more about Nufarm products at nufarm.ca. All right, Kelvin, we had an interesting story come across our desk. Haven't heard about the Canadian Grain Commission surplus in a while. We got some news this week of how the Grain Commission plans to draw that surplus down with perhaps a freezing of fees. What is the news?
Yeah, exactly that. We had to dust off this news file. The Canadian Grain Commission 9-figure surplus that it built between 2013 and 2017. It peaked at about $156 million in user fees for grain inspection and weighing that grain companies ultimately passed down to farmers between that time frame. And this week, we finally saw the CGC announce a plan for using a large portion of that surplus. The CGC has announced that it's going to be locking in its fees, as you said, Lyndsey, freezing them at the current formula. And so in the meantime, costs have risen. And so those fees are no longer covering the cost of conducting these grain inspections. And so the Grain Commission says by March of 2027, so in 3 years' time, they expect to have drawn down this surplus from where it sits today at about $112 million to $57 million. That includes also setting aside $40 million in a contingency fund. That was announced back in 2018 and kind of re-announced this or reaffirmed this week in the news release coming from Chief Commissioner David Hunt. And so, yeah, the Grain Commission announcing that it's choosing to keep its fees where they are rather than increasing them to cover costs. And so in the meantime, they're drawing down the surplus in a large way with this.
Have you had feedback on this? We know that the surplus is definitely a bone of contention for a lot of producers. Have producers sort of reached out and said, no, I think we should do fill in the blank?
Well, if you go back to 2017, when the surplus was fresh on everybody's mind and everybody's like, what are we doing with this pot of money that ultimately came from farmers? There were ideas talk about writing checks to farmers, sending the money back kind of thing. Reducing user fees at the time was one of the options. But the Grain Commission also proposed investing this money in a producer compensation fund to improve payment security in scenarios where grain companies go under. And another option that was put on the table at the time was investing this $100+ million in upgrades to facilities for technical services for the grain handling chain, for the grain industry. And if you connect the dots, that sounds a lot like what Cereals Canada is undertaking right now as it aims to raise over $100 million for this GATE project in downtown Winnipeg, which the vision is to have it serve as a hub for grain promotion, research, technical services, build on what CIGI, the Canadian International Grains Institute, and Cereals Canada have been doing for 50 years. And so, I have had a little bit of feedback, at least with some people saying, hey, it'd be nice if this money went to Cereals Canada for that building. And so that's where I think there would be also people on the opposite side of that, as say you're a farmer in Alberta, you may not feel like the fees that you contributed towards should be going to a building being built on land. It looks like it will likely be, this gate project would be built on land owned by Richardson, a prominent grain company and member in Cereals Canada. And so I think there would be some opposition to that. There may also be legislative, Tyler would know this better than I would, whether there is legal or legislative requirements as to how these surplus funds could be used, whether they could be transferred to Cereals Canada for something like the gate project. But that is a bit of the discussion that is out there right now.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, what say you? Do you think using the surplus to freeze fees is the best use of that money?
So I think the short answer is yes. The long answer is lots of people have lots of opinions on how to do these things. A little bit surprised that it's taken this long for the Grain Commission to get to the decision. I was working at Grain Growers of Canada like 6 or 7 years ago when this first came up, and there's been lots of rounds. You know, one of the unfortunate things about governments is that when they end up with money like this that they're not supposed to have, and we saw this with this case, we saw this with the tariffs on fertilizer imports in Eastern Canada, you know, government's best solution is always some big complicated program that spends the money. And often I think that the right solution, and I go back to the days when I was a political staffer, the best political solution is actually the easy, simple one. And the easy, simple one in this case was just drive the fees down to zero. And I guess they haven't done that. What they're doing is they're maintaining the fees at the existing amount. I think the bigger issue is that when you do that, you take some of the pressure off, and there should be pressure around Grain Commission reform. There should be pressure around what is the Grain Commission doing today? Does it need to be doing all of those things? What does it cost to get the Grain Commission to do things? And when we don't see fees going up because they're using the surplus to keep them down, it takes some of the pressure off of that reform.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point, Kelvin, that you made, that the discussion about the security part was brought up. Certainly this year for Saskatchewan, especially, some of the companies that have had licenses revoked, et cetera, that owe farmers money, most of them have a Saskatchewan presence. Some, of course, also have Manitoba or Alberta. Why do you think that didn't maybe take hold or get legs?
Oh, that's a good question. I think because in some ways, like Tyler said, government is trying to figure out the most fair way of returning this money to the people that contributed to it. And in that case, maybe it wouldn't be. I'm not sure that we do have the bonding program right now where grain companies have to have a bond or other form of security. So I'm not sure why that specific idea didn't go further. But to me, this whole surplus issue has created unhealthy, I don't know, to use a young person term here, but vibes in the grain industry. There's a lot of relationships that have in the grain industry between institutions and different organizations that are, because people have different opinions. Like Tyler said, there's 1,000 different opinions on how this money should be used. And so when you have this large pot of money sitting there for such a long time, there's a lot of just difficult relationship difficulties and things that are counterproductive to the overall big picture of Canada's grain industry and advancing our competitiveness and sales and marketing and promotion around the world when you get infighting over how this money gets used. And so I think it would be nice to get this cleaned up in this chapter in the past. And even with this announcement this week, there's still a $57 million surplus that's expected to be there in 3 years' time. So that's still a large pot of money that needs to be dealt with.
I didn't ask
Lyndsey, I think that,
yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
Sorry, I think that there's this sense that when a government changes, we may see Grain Commission reform happen pretty quickly, but I'm skeptical because I think of all of that division that Kelvin talked about. I think that there's some legwork that's going to need to be done to figure out what does that future actually look like.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things we probably haven't talked maybe about on this issues panel more than we normally would is the upcoming election. There are several things at play that on, of course, our friends to the south as well that we'll probably end up talking about next week because we're short on time. Kelvin, I'm going with #vibes for this entire show. That's my new favorite thing. But I did want to, before we go, I did want to touch on the water agency announcement that came out this week. I think it's really important that we touch on this, more to come. But what was the announcement? What are we thinking on this one as far as its impact on agriculture?
A number of years ago, I think it was actually in 2017's federal budget, the Liberals announced they were going to create a Canada Water Agency, a national agency to look after a federal entity, standalone to look after water policy planning. And this week it was officially launched as the Environment Minister Guilbeault was in downtown Winnipeg at the Forks, announcing the launch of this new Canada Water Agency. And so I think in some ways in agriculture, we know that water is a public good, an extremely important public good, and more coordination is needed between jurisdictions. But there is concern that this could potentially lead to more oversight or regulation in ways that is unhelpful and where agriculture's voice isn't maybe heard or stakeholders aren't at the table that need to be and that type of thing. And so I think it's definitely something that farm groups and farmers across the country should be paying attention to the direction for this Canada Water Agency.
Tyler, I would like to point out that CAPI's podcast, The Ag Policy Connection, hosted by one Kelvin Heppner, now an award-winning podcast, I would like to put out there, won a bronze award with the Canadian Farm Writer Federation just last week. I think that was announced. So the award, what's that?
You should have just said award-winning, not bronze award-winning.
Okay. Oh, sorry. But bronze is my favorite of the three, like as far as colors go. Anyway, so award-winning podcast, the Ag Policy Connection, did talk about water, and as Kelvin mentioned, public good. Where do we see something like a water agency playing a role in water in Canada?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. That water episode grew out of some other work that we've done, just really recognizing how critical water is as an issue for the future of Canadian agriculture. Often how underappreciated it is. There's a lot of challenges. Too much water some places, not enough others. I think it really, the government does seem to be leaning into the water agency playing kind of a proactive role, supporting and investing in extension and support. I think that there's some, concerns in the past whenever the government had quite a heavy hand on water in the prairies, but there is a need for us to better understand how much water we actually have, how we're using it, how can we use it better, and hopefully the water agency will play some of that or do some of that work.
I will just, as a final note, I will note my skepticism on such things. Tyler, I think, that's great. I hope that it is a proactive role. The fact that they hold it at the Forks, for anyone who doesn't know or who hasn't been there, the Forks, of course, the convergence of these rivers in Winnipeg, great place to hang out until it gets dark. And also certainly a place to notice the color of the water, which is not great, and the amount of potential pollution running through it that wrongly was pinned on farmers for many years, of course, and we just turn a blind eye to Winnipeg dumping raw sewage in the waterways in Manitoba. So, Kelvin, forgive my cynicism perhaps, but this does make me a little nervous, especially having Guilbeault stand there and in front of the Forks and say that, we're going to save Canada's water. Am I right to be cynical? Please say yes.
I think, you and I both lived through the hog barn moratorium in Manitoba, which the government at the time, like you said, pointed the finger directly at the hog industry and manure spreading as a reason for algae blooms in Lake Winnipeg. And so, I think that is certainly a concern here, as this is also a government that has talked about a fertilizer emissions reduction policy and that type of thing. And so there's potential here that this could be a backdoor into another aspect of Environment and Climate Change Canada, not Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, having a say on what happens on farms across the country. I think that's the concern here.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And it is warranted, everybody. So let's just stay with that one. All right. We are out of time. Tyler, over in Quebec, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lyndsey.
All right. Kelvin, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Everyone else as well.
All right. And I will be back on Tuesday's show as per usual. Your regular host, Sean Haney, will be back for Monday's Agronomy Monday. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Cheers, everybody.